Okay, there is a new sheriff in town up in Idaho, and he's somebody we know here in San Diego, Sheriff Ballis. He was elected in November 2024, and he was sworn into office in January 2025. Ballas served in the infantry field for the United States Marine Corps for 11 years. After serving in the Marines, Ballas earned his bachelor's and master's of science degrees in Homeland Security and Emergency Management from National University in San Diego, California. He is currently a doctoral candidate pursuing his PhD in emergency management through Capella University. Ballas has a special interest in studying K through 12 targeted violence and working toward evidence-based prevention and response strategies. Before his election, Ballas was a patrol officer for the Haley Police Department on special assignment, school resource officer with the Blaine County School District. Ballas served as the president of the Idaho Association School Resource Officer from 2022 to 2024. He was also a board member of San Diego County Gun Owners a few years ago until he moved to the beautiful state of Idaho in Blaine County. So we're going to talk to him. But first, this segment is sponsored by Cargo, Cases and Rugged Gear Outfitters in El Cajon. Go to cargostores.com. They're on 423 Broadway in El Cajon. If you need to protect your gear while you're on the go, look no further. Cargo has the perfect case for you. So if you need it protected and you want it customized, Cargo is the place to go. Use code GOR for 10% off on their website or mention Gun Owners Radio at the store and you'll get 10% off. Great products, great prices, and uncommonly good service. Cases and Rugged Gear Outfitters. Sheriff, how are you, sir?
Mike, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good, man. It's good to see you. I'm so congratulations on your recent election and all your success and your beautiful family and everything you've done.
All glory to God. We're just happy to do his work and be his hands on the feet on the ground and do great work here in Blaine County.
That's awesome. Now, like I said, you used to be on the board of San Diego County Gun Owners. You were a very active member of San Diego County Gun Owners, and we were, mixed emotions when you went to Blaine County, Idaho, but you moved your family up to the beautiful state of Idaho. And then the next thing I know, you're sheriff. It was like you moved into town, and then I'm like, what? What happened? Which is fantastic news. I think they made a great decision. But talk a little bit about what it was like moving from San Diego to Idaho and what got you into the sheriff's race.
Yeah, so my wife and I are originally from Tucson, Arizona. You know, we called California home after I left the Marines, as most service members do. And honestly, we were looking at Tennessee or Texas. And I came out here to visit my brother who lives in Boise in July of 2020. And I told my wife, I said, hey, we got to put Idaho on the short list. Her old principal, who was a principal there in San Marcos, had moved up a couple years prior. And she reached out to a principal and she said, you know what, not only will you love it up here, but I actually have a perfect job for you. My wife's a literacy coach, so she really specializes in supporting teachers and coaching literacy and helping students. And it was about a 3-week span between the initial interview and our decision to move. And then about a year and a half later, I was doing consulting work with a lot of schools across the U.S., some down there in the San Diego area on school safety. Started to work with our school district here, got to know the school resource officer at the middle school. And she said, hey, we got a high school SRO position becoming open here shortly. And I thought, man, this is such a unique opportunity to work from the inside out. Anyone that does consulting knows that you're there to provide recommendations. You're not there to actually see the follow through. And so there was a lot of prayer that went into it. And we said, look, we're going to step away from the consulting and go in as a patrol officer, got hired and became the school resource officer. Just an amazing experience. Got to do a lot of great work, create a model for what evidence-based programs can look like. And then fast forward almost 2 years later, and the opportunity to become sheriff came up. And again, a lot of prayer.
What was the catalyst? What made you run? I mean, I was so happy to hear it. Our whole point, San Diego County Gun Owners, is local elected. And I don't think, had you ever thought about running for office before, or what made you decide?
Never, not at all. And the long story short is my wife was 20 weeks pregnant. This was in February, actually right about this time. We went in for a 20-week checkup, And our son, we didn't know he was our son at that time, but Tucker, he had extreme anemia. So he had the human parvovirus is something that's very common, but very rare when it comes to pregnancy to transfer to the baby. And so we were kind of struck by lightning on that, and we got the worst case scenario of that virus. And he was extremely anemic, and our doctor said, "Look, you guys need to get to Salt Lake." He wouldn't give us any more information than that. And so we ended up the next day down in Salt Lake. And what happened is that there's laws here in Idaho that are very restrictive when it comes to abortion, specifically medically necessary abortion. More or less, the mom has to be bleeding out on her deathbed before they'll take any action. And so we went to Utah. Within that 24 hours, the entire situation had changed. He had gotten even worse than he was 24 hours prior, and just had to make a decision at that moment, knowing that if we came back to Idaho, my wife's life was at risk. The likelihood of that pregnancy was already extremely rare for it to continue. And we ended up, our son returned to God that day. We always say that he was just a little too perfect for this earth. And that was on February 23rd of last year. And then about a week later, I'd never thought about running for sheriff. Elected office wasn't in my wheelhouse. I'd been a cop all of 2 years at that time. And I had some very influential people in the community approach me and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about running for sheriff?" And being a faith-based family and at that time very in touch with the spirit, I knew there was something more to those conversations, that it wasn't just this random thing. I felt like God was calling me to really explore this. And so I did some research, looked into what gaps were there with the current sheriff, what opportunities were there for our community. And about 2 weeks later, I announced my candidacy by March 15th. So I think on March 13th or 14th, I submitted the paperwork. And so it was something that was literally a week or two decision that our family had to make.
First, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Very, very sad to hear that. I'm very sorry. That's interesting that it's part of that was part of the calculus for you to run for office, and I'd imagine that was a lot of deep thought and conversation, and you and your wife probably had to talk a lot about that. When you did make the decision to run, like what were some of the things? First off, were you running against an incumbent, or was it going to be an open seat?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the current sheriff had been a law enforcement officer for 33 years. He was going into his third term here as sheriff. We are kind of an anomaly here in Idaho. Our Blaine County is what most people would say is the only blue county in Idaho. Really what it is we got a population of about 25,000 residents, 15,000 registered voters, and it's honestly a pretty equal split. We have a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third what we call unaffiliated or independent voters. Those unaffiliated overwhelmingly vote blue. And so the incumbent sheriff was a Democrat. I myself had been a lifelong Republican. I switched over to unaffiliated in 2022. And so when it came time for the election, I'm coming off of this, our family is coming off of this, losing our son and having to go out of state to get an abortion. And those laws were put into place by Republicans in our state that just don't understand all the medical nuances when it comes to a medically necessary abortion. So it was a very raw, difficult time for me and my wife. And so I switched from unaffiliated to Democrat, like literally right when I did my candidacy, like right before.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that you ran as a Democrat. I didn't know what you were before. It just doesn't come up. It's San Diego County Gunners Radio. It doesn't really come up. We don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green. It doesn't come up. We're totally nonpartisan. So it hadn't been anything that we'd talked about before, but I saw that you ran as a Democrat. I saw that Blaine County, I was looking at some of the stats here, and Blaine County is a very blue, very Democrat county in the middle of a very red state, fairly red state. And I didn't know that that was part of the decision making, but you're as pro-gun as any person on the planet. You're as pro-Second Amendment as anybody I've ever met. There's no wiggle room. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, like I said, you served on San Diego County Gun Owners Board. I personally worked with you a number of times, a lot on a lot of different things. And you're not you're maybe the most pro-Second Amendment Democrat I've ever met. What was that like though? Running in, how did that come up? How did that being pro Second Amendment, running for sheriff in a blue county in a red state, like how did that affect the race?
I mean, it was a huge part of the primary race. There was a lot of questions about, was I truly a Democrat? What were my purposes? What was I doing? Was I just kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing? Was it just an opportunity thing? And the truth is it really came down to that single issue and that experience that we had just been through. Look, I'm a very critical thinker. I'm the type of person that wants to see the data, being evidence based, extremely empathetic and towards people's situation, but also looking at what the reality is. And so I was never a hardcore, I'm only going to vote party lines. I'm only going to make decisions based off of the letter that's at the end of my name. Those things were never me, but it came up a lot. And here's what you have to understand about Idaho is even though we are in a blue county, this is Idaho. This is a Second Amendment state. The Democrats, they carry guns. They're pro-hunting, pro-Second Amendment. Of course, you have individuals that are more traditional Democrat when it comes to the Second Amendment. But overwhelmingly, we're in a community that supports the rights to own guns and everything that comes along with it. What was interesting, though, was in the primary, because I did have a Republican, or I'm sorry, in the general election, there was a Republican running as well. And, they tried to attack me on being anti-Second Amendment or I'm going to try to take guns. And it was just laughable. Honestly, it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, it's Blaine County is very rural. It's a resort town, my understanding. I guess it's like ski resorts.
Yeah, it's one of the number one ski resorts in the world, actually.
And was there a one or two like big issues that were like really mattered in this race? I mean, people, Second Amendment is always kind of like a secondary issue, and people ask about it. Was there some kind of big thing that you guys were fighting over? I know you were a school resource officer and you were coming into the race. Was there some kind of big issue that was really the center of the race?
So here's what's interesting is that there was no issues at the sheriff's office. Our sheriff's office is phenomenal. It wasn't like there was any scandals. It wasn't like, the deputies on the ground weren't doing a good job or anything like that. Really, the two main things that I ran on and that the community was really asking for when I was doing my research is that the sheriff at the time, they didn't feel like he was well connected to the community. There wasn't a direct line of communication. He wasn't available. They didn't feel like he was as present as he should be. And again, we're a county of 25,000 residents. It's everybody knows everybody, right?
Yeah, I would imagine 25,000 is yeah.
And then my main campaign was running on prevention-based policing versus just response. Right, we tend in the law enforcement community to focus on how quick we can respond, what equipment do we need, what training do we need, and those are all extremely important. My mindset is that our end goal of law enforcement is less crime, and so our true goal should be how do we respond less, and we have to look at the underlying issues that drive crime, which are overwhelmingly substance use and mental health issues. And that's the community that I was tapped into as a school resource officer, working with different partners on how do we address those issues. And that's what I'm doing as sheriff, is looking at how do we address those underlying issues to actually take less people to jail and send less people to the ER.
So it's a county of what you said, 25,000? So so there's a sheriff's department, and there are also some police departments within the county as well.
Yeah, we have three municipal police departments. We have Sun Valley PD, Haley PD, and then Bellevue Marshal.
And you were working for one of the PDs as a school resource officer.
Yeah, I was with Haley Police Department.
So what prepared you as a school, PD and working with the schools? What helped prepare you? Like what advantage did you have working that you brought to the sheriff's department? You know what I mean? How did that prepare you?
Yeah. Well, first is all the community organizations that I was connected with. So a lot of mental health, suicide prevention organizations, just a lot of things that are on the peripherals of what we do as law enforcement. So I was a representative of Haley Police Department, a lot of times speaking as the school resource officer. But really in a community this small, our high school has 1,000 students in it. And so as the school resource officer, in just the high school alone, my exposure to those students and by proxy their parents and the teachers that work at the school and all the other schools that I worked with, I think is what really made the entire situation so unique. Being in a small community, I quite honestly had just as much, maybe more name recognition than the sheriff himself because of that connectedness to the community.
Yeah, because you've been all those. I'd imagine being pro Second Amendment. It's not just like, hey, it's not just a box you check. You've been a part of organizations. You were an instructor here. You did a lot to help with the activism part of Second Amendment and all that other all the stuff that you did here in San Diego was based around firearms. What was it like being, having that Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment activism background, being vocal about it, being a central point of your life, and working at a school? Did that ever cause any friction? Was there something that maybe something you had to fight for or against because of it, or how did that work?
Yeah, so last year there was a bill that came up in the House, and it was a allowing guns in school bill. And essentially it was, if you're an educator and we're a constitutional carry state, but if you got your CCW, you were allowed to carry in your school. You didn't have to, there was no ongoing training requirement. There was nothing of that nature. Now, in Idaho, school boards already have the authority to allow their teachers to carry. They can come up with their own program. So we had about 10 school districts in the state that had come up with these very good comprehensive plans with their local law enforcement on what initial and ongoing training look like, right? And there's a lot of nuances and things when you're considering countering an active shooter threat at a school. And so the Idaho Association of School Resource Officers and myself, we actually came out against this bill. And the main reason that we came out against this bill is because it would have stripped away the school board's ability to actually come up with comprehensive programs that we know are needed to be successful. So what we asked was a bill that actually mandated schools to create a program for their staff to be able to carry on school grounds. Right now, it's up in the air. They can choose to, they can choose not to. So our compromise was, look, we see the importance of this, but we also don't want to take away the good things that other school districts have done. There's some response considerations that this bill just isn't really doing. So we want to mandate schools to do this and let us help you build those programs successfully. At the end of the day, it passed the House, the original bill, and then it got held in committee in the Senate. But that bill comes up almost every year, so I expect to see it again.
Wow. Okay, so was this specifically just for teachers, or was it anybody, like students, or not students, but parents or whatever, or just CCW holders? Was it all encompassing, or is it really specifically addressing whether teachers could or couldn't carry when they were on the job?
Yeah, it was essentially teachers and volunteers. What's interesting, though, is the state code doesn't provide an exemption for off-duty law enforcement to carry on school grounds. It actually specifically says law enforcement while doing their official duty. So that was one thing that we highlighted, was like, you're not even technically, by the law, you don't even allow off-duty LE to conceal carry on campus. And so there was just some things that they just kind of missed the mark on it. The NRA was a big sponsor of this bill, and my stance the entire time, they were pushing this as a Second Amendment bill. I viewed it very much as a school safety bill, and the main reason for that is kind of to your point, is that if this was truly about the Second Amendment, then you wouldn't have any limitations. You would say the right to carry and protect kids is everybody's right. But they didn't go that route. They said, hey, just employees, and we're going to take away the power from the school districts. And
so conceptually, you are okay with trained teachers caring for protection when they're on the job. You just didn't like the procedures and wanted to make sure that school boards retained the power that they had over that program. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's primary it. And look, at my academic background and a lot of my professional background is specifically active shooter phenomenon in schools. And there is no doubt in my mind, the evidence overwhelmingly supports that having equal or greater means to counter the threat, having a firearm plays a significant, or can play a significant role in reducing the number of victims associated with those attacks and ending those attacks quicker. There's no doubt in my mind that the empirical evidence, emergent research all support that.
Interesting. There's one thing I definitely want to talk a lot about here. You live in a rural area, and you were telling me when we were talking yesterday that it is uniquely to rural areas, especially resort areas. You were saying has an unusually high suicide rate, and that one of the things that you are working on and tackling and organizing to prevent is suicide, and specifically with a firearm, but any kind of suicide. Talk a little bit about that, because I think the idea of Second Amendment activists, people that really truly believe in their soul, that the Second Amendment is important, working on suicide issues is an important issue, but it's kind of a tightrope to walk sometimes, because the anti-gun folks have embraced it and used it against us so many times that we don't know what to do, And it sounds like you guys are working on a really interesting program. You want to talk a little bit about that? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so this phenomenon of mountain resort communities, so Aspen, Vail, Sun Valley, where we live, experiencing extremely higher rates of suicide than other areas is a real thing. And here in Idaho specifically, we have the highest rate of suicide in the entire state here in Blaine County. And there's a lot of kind of ideas or assumptions around that. A lot of it has to do with people come to communities like this because of the isolation and all the outdoor opportunities. But also that same environment creates some challenges. There's times when we can have snow on the ground 6-7 months out of the year, and it kind of creates this level of depression. There's also a big party culture that goes along with resort ski communities. And so it's kind of like these real high highs and these real low lows as people start to get into alcohol and maybe other type of drugs. And so it's a very common phenomenon within these resorts. And one thing that we've looked at is, and this is no surprise to anyone, when it comes to suicides, if a firearm is that mechanism, it's the high 90th percentile of completing suicide when an individual uses a firearm.
Right. For the same reason that it is an effective self-defense tool, it is also a very unfortunate but successful suicide tool.
Yeah.
Which is a reason to focus on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's not the tool itself that is the cause, right?
Right. Of course not.
So There's a lot of different groups here. One of them is called 5B Suicide Prevention Alliance. And here in Idaho, depending on where you live, your license plate gets a very specific number and letter. So for Blaine County, it's 5B. So that's where that comes from. But one of the things that we have been working on specifically over the past about year and a half is called a campaign called Preventing Access to Lethal Means, or our PALM campaign. And this is focusing on firearms and access to even over-the-counter drugs, but prescription drugs. And essentially, what can we do to educate the community on their role in helping to prevent suicides? We know that in a lot of cases, and probably in the majority of cases, when it comes to suicide, although people may be suffering from depression and other symptoms, the act of suicide itself is a very spontaneous act.
I've heard that. In other words, spontaneous. Exactly what it means. They're in a bad spot and they make a decision that's not well thought out. They say, "Hey, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to commit suicide." It's not something in a lot of situations where they think about for weeks or months. It's a horrible, quick, brash decision, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and a lot of times that even includes not really having a plan before. It's one of the questions we ask when someone's at risk for suicide. First of all, we're very direct in those conversations. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever thought about killing yourself? What is your plan to kill yourself? Jeez. Well, we know because it's spontaneous at times that if individuals have access to a firearm, that decision is going to be a decision that they can't pull back from. And so what we decided to do is that we know the only way to effectively communicate, and this is just risk communication principles 101, for a message to be effective. I don't care if it's about diabetes, I don't care if it's about working out, what food you eat, or when it comes to suicide's access to firearms, it has to come from a trusted source, and it has to come from a source that those individuals connect with. We know that Moms Demand Action, Sandy Hook Promise, even though they may have some of the same goals and the same good intentions, that message will never resonate within the Second Amendment.
Because they're not trusted. Even if it's something that we agree with, like, hey, make sure that kids can't access your fire, whatever it is. Even if it's a common message, which there are very few, they don't have our trust because of the other 99.9% of the things that they do are something we don't agree with. So if an anti-suicide message coming from an anti-gun organization will not affect a gun owner. They won't listen. They won't trust. It doesn't. It rolls right off their back.
Absolutely, and we also know that you can't legislate mental health, right? Yeah. That's also not effective. You can't have mandates that people, store their firearms in a certain way. That's not going to resonate either. And so our campaign is an organic grassroots campaign put together by the 5B Suicide Prevention Alliance, but in collaboration with the Second Amendment community here. So it's working with our local gun stores, it's working with our gun ranges. Law enforcement is part of that, but we also know that we're not trusted in a lot of this conversation. So we try to be careful in our role in that as well. We're working with vendors that provide CCW training here and other firearms trainers. And the main focus of the campaign is very rarely do people look, especially when we're talking about kids, no one looks at their kid and says, yeah, my son's going to kill himself, right? There's times that happens, but the truth is, and the hard reality that we don't like to talk about is sometimes there are no signs.
Yeah, people are shocked
these
by it.
Sure. Especially kids, are just dealing with these things internally. And we've had some extremely difficult suicides. In just over a year, we've had 3 15-year-olds, 2 males and a female, commit suicide using a firearm. And in, those were cases where you had extremely responsible gun owners. One of them had a cable lock, and the kid actually researched, how do you get this cable lock off the gun? They actually had to research how to load the gun. They didn't even know. And this was coming off of a time that was all smiles, hanging out with friends. Everything was good in their lives. Jeez. And so our campaign is that grassroots campaign. Our gun stores have committed to actually handing out pamphlets. And then with that, we also understand that stories are powerful and personal stories are powerful. And so we're creating short video clips of families that have been impacted by suicide, and actually one individual that survived a suicide by a firearm, and letting them tell their stories to help have that impact.
So what advice, that's amazing work, by the way. And as sheriff, as an elected official, that's awesome that you're supporting it in the way that you are. And I think it's even better with your pro Second Amendment background. You're doing it from a place of authority, and you're making sure that it's getting done right. What would you say, what advice would you have, or what would you tell somebody who's very pro Second Amendment, someone that's very passionate about the Second Amendment and gun ownership? It's something that matters to them more than anything else. What advice would you give if they would like to, get involved or do more when it comes to suicide prevention?
First of all, model the example. Right. I think what most Second Amendment people struggle with is the concept of access to a firearm for self-defense, and keeping a firearm stored in a manner that can truly prevent an individual that shouldn't have access to getting to it when it comes to suicide. So modeling that behavior is the first thing. The second, I think, is being very direct with friends and family. Just telling them, hey, I want you to know that I care for you and I love you and that you're important to me. If you're having a hard time, can I store your firearms for you? Some strategies that we talk about in our campaign, if you're the spouse or a family member, some things that you can do is actually reset the code on a safe. If someone is not in a good position, say, hey, let me reset this code. I won't let you know the code until you get, or you feel like you're in the position that you need to be. That's a very easy one. Or just telling a friend, like, hey man, let me just hang on to your guns for a little bit. I understand that you're going through a divorce. You just lost your job, whatever it is. And I care for you and I love you and I'm here to help you. Here, we actually, all of our police departments here will store firearms for individuals. It's a no questions asked when it comes to getting it returned. I'll give you a quick story. We had an officer on a traffic stop. He was running a gun that was in the vehicle. He was doing a check on it. And the call out was one of my former students. And so I went to the traffic stop and I went up to the window and was like, hey man, what's going on? How are you doing? And his answer to me was not really good. And I'm a cop. I could have left it at that. But I decided to dig more. And I said, what do you mean not very good? And he was talking about his mom, and he had just recently lost his grandma, and he's in this really hard spot. And I said, hey, first of all, I care for you, and I'm sorry that you're going through that. Have you ever thought about killing yourself? And he said, actually, I have. I said, I care for you and I love you. And if you want, we can temporarily hold your firearm. We're not confiscating it. It is yours. Whenever you feel like you're in a good place, come by the PD. We'll give it back to you. No questions asked, no paperwork required. And he let us do that. And he came in about a week later and he got his firearm back. And he says, I really want to thank you. That really helped me. And of course, we gave him some resources as well to connect with in between that time. But just that simple offer is extremely important. And you don't have to be this big activist, but again, modeling that behavior and just talking to people that that say, hey, if you're ever in this position or if you notice someone might be going down that road, I'm willing to hold on to your guns until you think you're in a good spot.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Sheriff. That's a great story. Sounds like you're doing an amazing job up there. I'm really, really happy for you. I just, it blows me away because I knew you when, and now you're a big shot sheriff, and I think that's awesome. And congratulations. Actually, last question: what's that gun hanging on the wall there behind you? The gold one. Is that a Marlin? What do you got there?
Yeah, that's a Winchester 3030 that was donated to the sheriff's office. I think about in the mid 1990s, and so it stays here in the sheriff's office.
Nice, good looking. Well, my very best to you, my very best to your crew, and please send all my love to your family, your wife, and your beautiful kids. I still remember doing seminars in your office here in Fallbrook, and your beautiful little daughter. I don't even know how old she is now, but she was teeny tiny back then, and she was playing on the floor. And you were lecturing on gun safety and the Second Amendment, and we were, begging people to become members of San Diego County gun owners. And she was just off in her own little world playing with toys on the floor. So I just have such fond memories, and I just thank you for all that you've done.
Yeah, well, Mike, thank you so much. And, the being part of the gun owners set me up for success in what I'm doing now and really what I'm doing in life. And Defensive Tactics and Firearms is still up and running. Instructor Shane's still running it. We're still doing Riverside, San Diego CCWs. We're up in the Murrieta area now. But yeah, and hopefully I'll be able to make it to Gun Prom, if not this year, maybe next year.
That would be great. Awesome. Sheriff, thank you so much. Sheriff Morgan Ballis, Blaine County, Idaho, former San Diego County Gun Owners Board member. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate you letting us pry you away from the Super Bowl, and thank you for all the initiatives that you're doing and everything that you're doing up there. Awesome job. Thanks, man.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you. Bye.
Dude, that was cool. That was a cool interview, right?
That was good.
Yeah, my buddy Morgan. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. I'm Michael from Gun Owners Radio. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and make a comment. Help us out. Go to gunownersradio.com. Thanks for watching.